Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Virtual Global Innovation Forum. And I'm delighted that we get to kick off this year's amazing conference, albeit remotely, but with a first for GIF, which is a movie and a private screening of not just a movie or any old movie, a wonderful documentary all about general magic. I'm delighted to be welcoming the founder of General Magic and chairman, Marc Porat, and the director of the movie, Sarah Kerruish. Guys, welcome to GIF, and thank you, Marc, for joining us very early in the morning from your side. I hope you're both well, and it's a real pleasure. This is a great movie, which we're going to screen straight after this talk. Please do stick around. I've now watched it twice. It's insightful, it's inspiring, it's moving. It's a wonderful documentary. So thank you for both making it possible.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for letting us be here. It's wonderful to be with you all, wherever you are.
So, Marc, look, I wanted to start with you because you worked at Apple, and during that time you wrote a book called Pocket Crystal, Whole Person Thinking, which you then, in which you described sort of what a smartphone looked like and felt like and how it would come to be. And this was, what, in the late 80s or early 90s, and at which point you then spun that out into the company General Magic. Now, what struck me watching this movie was your vision for the future was so clear, so accurate about these things that we're kind of carrying around, all of us today. We're truly living it. Where did that insight spring from? Where did you get that vision?
Okay, good. Hello, Tom, and hello, everyone. As Sarah said, wherever you are. Good question, and I maybe two thoughts about that. Number one, these ideas don't come; they're not overnight success, inspiration. Suddenly, a light of bolt, sort of bolt of lightning hit, and the angels dance around the shoulders, and it's not that way. These things take time. And the second is that this ability to have, what looks in retrospect to be some kind of a superpower, I think is inherent in everyone on this call. I think it's part of being a human and being conscious. It's a matter of recognizing it and what one does with it. So as to the first point, yes, this kind of emergence that you'll see in the film of the idea, a full-blown idea of not only a smartphone, but the environment in which it's operating, which is very similar to today's, I must say, didn't come overnight in 1988 or 1977 is actually when I started it. It came out of a PhD at Stanford where I studied the information economy, and came out of the Aspen Institute where I made a movie called The Information Society. It came out of thinking, sort of a lot because I was driven by the notion of revolution. I had been born into revolutionary times.
Yeah.
Counterculture, Vietnam, feminism, environmentalism, they all piled up one on top of each other. Political upheaval in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And so it was that kind of revolutionary spirit that said, we can do anything if we throw away the rules. That got me interested in the revolution, this kind of new revolution. And yes, 1976 was the PhD, then called the Information Economy. Then 1988 was the single piece of paper in which the vision emerged. And 1990, to look at the book, I don't remember. 1989 was when I wrote the book in August.
So that's the book you've got there. Would you mind showing us?
Sure. This is the red book, and this is it's called Whole Person Paradigm, Whole Person Thinking. And Pocket Crystal is what developed into, and it has all the good things in it. And that's what developed.
And it's amazing, as somebody who's seen that book, it's got so many aspects of the future, or as life we live now, down to the kinds of devices. There's even something called Facebook Base, which sounds awfully like Facebook. It's an absolutely remarkable document. And I think, Marc, you're doing yourself a disservice because there is context for sure. You had that context of revolution and your ideas about the information society. But you described so well, there was this moment. So I'm going to put you on the spot. And can you take us to that moment? Because there's that moment of context and then there's a moment of inspiration. So talk us through that. How does that happen?
Yes, it was at the Aspen Institute in Colorado, up in many very high up. Not that I was high. It was the environment. Just a quick note. It was just a quick note about superpower, and I'm not ducking your questions. I think everyone in the audience has that, and it's only a question of the courage or the foolhardiness or something, some combination of personal attributes, and maybe at times just a moment in time where I allowed myself to plunge into this thing with no inhibition, and then kind of the flux of the idea, of this creative idea, then built on itself, and at some point you just want to pull the ripcord and get out, because it can be a little frightening. You're out there with a huge vision, you don't know what to do with it, but you proceed. So that's what happened. And what did happen, it's portrayed in the film. I think Sarah did a great job of capturing that. Is a moment of clarity that I then held and kept holding and developing. And it was, as you said, it was the entire environment. The reason I couched as whole person thinking is that was the way to organize that particular vision of the future, was to go internal. And to say, what is it that makes us humans, and what's important to us? And that's where you quickly get into the paradigm of it has to communicate. But who are you communicating with? People you love, people in your family, your friends, but also people that you work with, people you don't know. So immediately you knew this was a communication experience. Communicating with yourself, it's sort of about organizing who, what, where, when. It's all the applications that we use all the time. Calendars and contact managers and maps and all of that. And because a whole person is always a whole person, you're always wherever you are, this little thing had to be with you. It wasn't, there's no concept here of going to your desk or lugging around, what was just beginning to happen there, these 9-kilogram things, laptop. So that was it. And then the last element, which again comes from whole person thinking, is what do you actually do? You read, you research, you find things to buy, you find things to play with, you find games and movies. That's whole person. Well, that had to be in there also, so it needed a network that was ubiquitous. And as you fleshed it out, that's how the whole idea kind of came to be.
And that strikes me as why it's still so relevant today, sort of 20, 30 years on, because what you've started with is not a consumer in some sort of category. If you'd started with the computer consumer of the kind of late 80s, early 90s, you would have ended up in a very different place. But you started with the person, and that's why it's still relevant today, and it will still be relevant in probably 20, 30 years, just in a different format, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm sorry, Tom.
No, carry on, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that when you ground, when I was able to ground and anchor to the emotional state, the intellectual state, the financial, the relationships, things that are ancient, things that are in all literature and drama, things that are in all of our experiences. There's nothing unique in what I was thinking. It's just a kind of a moment of an inventory of the human experience. Well, as you said, Tom, if you translate that into things, then those things don't have an obsolescence to them, because they're us. They're who we are.
Yeah. Well, I think you're, as Sarah says, you're doing yourself a disservice, but it's inspiring to feel like we all have this opportunity within us. But you seized this, and one of the things that makes the movie wonderful is it seems it's almost more a love story than a technology story. Indeed, the technology, it's funny, the technology sits a little bit in the background, but it's clear that you and the audience go along this journey, fall in love with this vision and with the team that you've built around you, this amazing team of luminaries who've invented the iPhone and the iPod since then, and so many other things. And then, of course, with general magic, there's this heartbreak as it all comes apart. Can you talk a little bit about how that experience felt for you? I mean, you know, you were the one living it, we get to watch it, but how did that feel as an arc?
Well, I used to not be able to do that until Sarah came along and said, you must do that. She's very persuasive. Because, you know, when you have as you'll see in the film, or maybe you already know, there was trauma associated with it, as there is in many love stories, not all. And when you feel trauma, when a human feels trauma, I mean, the first instinct is protective and withdraw, and maybe set aside, you know, certain defensive mechanisms. And I certainly went into that after the experience. And then Sarah came to my house and, you know, knocked me about the head, and and said, you must tell the story. And it was a love story. You know, I fell in love with an idea. And when you fall in love, imagine it's not an idea, but another person. When you fall in love, all of our experiences, you become slightly obsessed, and you know, right at the edge of that kind of, you know, crazy love, where you do things irrationally. You spend all your time on it. You know, you're waiting for the phone, for the cell phone you're waiting for that text, essentially. Today's phone. And you're nervous when you approach it, but you also glow. You know, you also have a kind of a radiance about you because you're in love. And that's what's so appealing. You're also a pain in the neck to other people because that's all you can talk about is this person you're in love with or something. In any event, if it's not a person but an idea, some of the same characteristics apply. And so with that enthusiasm, I went to Apple, and sure enough, other people began to fall in love with it and with each other. Not because I was sort of a great sayer of the future in some mystical way, but because it was already in the zeitgeist. It must have been in the consciousness, in the zeitgeist. And all of our great breakthroughs are incremental, as we know, in science, technology, and history, and so on. So I was able to find people who fell in love, and that was a very easy way to discriminate, in the best sense of the word, discriminate who's in and who's out. And when the team began to grow, these wizards, these magicians that you'll see in the film, who did go on and create the iPhone and the Android, actually both of them, I think selected others to join the team, partly on tech, and that's what they'll tell you. You know, we quizzed them on their knowledge of, you know, low-level processing and operating systems. But I think it was actually looking for the love. And I think that for me, the world is kind of divided between wets and dries. Dry people don't talk like this. You know, they'll want to talk about tech. They'll want to talk about, I don't know, finance. Yeah, I know all those things, but that's not where love originates. Footnote. Oh, am I frozen?
No. Oh, a little bit maybe, but we can hear you. Most importantly, Marc.
Okay, sorry about that. I wonder what that is. All right,
don't worry.
Okay, I'll carry on. Let me know if you can't hear me. Yeah, I mean, we know about those things, and if, you know, parenthetically, if someone says I'm in love with making money, that's a love story too, but it's not the love story that, you know, captivates the mind. So that's kind of the beginning of it. Then it develops, and as love develops, it turns into a relationship, and into a relationship can turn into a lot of admin and transactional realities of what a relationship has to do, particularly when you begin to have children and other responsibilities. But the love, if it's hot enough in the beginning, then it will sustain its heat through a long-term relationship and keep generating it. And if it begins to die, as we did in the company, you know, we had all kinds of forces that extinguished the enthusiasm and drained the joy.
Yeah,
that's what it's about, and that happens in any relationship once in a while. You have to have something that sustains you, and that's the original passion. The original passion is authentic, and deep and all-consuming, even for a moment in time, I think it'll carry you through the travails. And finally, yes, some relationships break up and cause an enormous amount of pain and damage to the principals in the love affair and their families, and some friendships are also broken or damaged, and that's in fact what happened also. And then there's this withdrawal and retreat, and as I said just a few minutes ago, this kind of protective envelope that comes around you, and then you come out of it and you move on in life. And that's exactly the arc of General Magic, the way I experienced it in retrospect and in the moment. And that's, I think, Sarah is a filmmaker. I mean, she knows tech also. She actually works at General Magic, but it's a story, and she understood that and wrote that story, not only my story, but the story of the family that came together, loved it and each other, and then had to experience all the joy and the peak experience of love, and then had to disband and move on to other parts of their lives.
Sarah, did you see that from the outset? Was this arc, this metaphor in your mind, or was it? How did you start with the vision for the movie?
Well, the love metaphor is Marc's, but the arc is definitely familiar. For me, General Magic was a very personal journey. I had obviously experienced the General Magic journey, and then because I was filming there at the time. But then many years later, a company that I've been very closely involved with failed in a very unexpected way. And it was so traumatic, it was eviscerating. And people talk about failure, there's sort of a failure culture, and it's sort of cute, but there's nothing cute about failure. It's eviscerating if it's something that you've committed deeply to, and as Marc said, is something you're very, very passionate about. And yet I knew out of General Magic and out of other failures I'd witnessed, there was some kind of alchemy that happened that transmuted, and that the people who came out of that experience, they'd come out differently. But many of the people who came out of the General Magic experience went on to do extraordinary things, whether it's, as Marc said, Tony, who worked with Steve on the iPod and iPhone, Andy Rubin, who developed Android, it's why it's called Android at Google, Megan Smith, who was Obama's chief technology officer. Oh my God, I could go on and on and on about the amazing people.
All these other things. I mean,
but I think that it's that dynamic that, how do you get through that? How do you deal with that? How do you then move through it? And what happens when you can move through it? And I think there is something absolutely spectacular and mysterious and magnificent about those people who can come through. But those who do come through have some unique characteristics. And I think one of them is self-reflection and the ability to be truly vulnerable and own up to what happened. Tony Fidel is one of the characters in the film is extremely good at this. When something happens, he's ruthless at being able to look at himself in the situation and say, okay, what happened? What did I do? What do I need to fix? Whereas I think a lot of us are afraid to look in those places, or afraid to own up to maybe our culpability or what we think is our culpability. But it's so empowering. And I think watching Marc go through that journey was so inspirational. He was so courageous to be able to talk about what happened to him, because as I said, it's just eviscerating, and it destroys lives, it destroys families, and yet amazing things happen. So it was a great privilege to make the film with him and all the other people in the film for that reason. And I think that's, there are lots of lessons, but one of the main ones for me is that get really good at taking that hard look at a situation in yourself. Get really good at figuring out what the next step is. I mean, don't hold on to it tightly in terms of your personal responsibility, unless it truly is, your personal responsibility. But get really good at that and develop an incredible sense of persistence. I see people who sort of give up quite early in a journey, or maybe they're halfway through the journey and they want to give up. But persistence rules the day. Developing that courage, that dig deep, keep going, if it's something that you really care about, because literally I watched miracles come from General Magic. It wasn't just one phoenix from the ashes, it was 100 phoenixes from the ashes. So that's the thing that I'm most interested in and that I really wanted to capture and to encourage and inspire other people who have a dream and want to bring something big into the world.
Well, I think it does that. So I certainly went away inspired, and as I say, so inspired I watched it again a few days later. Marc, that's a very interesting comment about this idea of vulnerability and self-reflection, because I think you show towards the end of the movie, a long time obviously after General Magic, when you're looking back at it, this real vulnerability, this sort of incredibly touching moment where you look back on it. But there's a point when you are, in fact, young Marc in the General Magic moment, and you're talking about to escape orbit. I think you use the phrase to escape orbit, or to maintain this sort of momentum that you need to create the future. You can't give yourself too much time for self-reflection. What's that balance? I mean, looking back on it, having heard Sarah's thoughts there, would you do things? Would you have framed that all very differently now? How would you balance that need for vulnerability versus the desire to almost keep the blinkers on and go for your dream?
Yeah, it was a paradox. It's clearly a paradox. To do anything hard, or to do anything that is tests one's edges of discomfort and ignorance, because we don't know what we're doing when we do what we do as entrepreneurs. We just have a projection of it, an imagination of it, and it's not real. It's only real and tangible in your mind. And so there's that's where the paradox is. Yes, at the same time that you are trying to escape Earth's gravity, and Earth's gravity is resistance and friction. By the way, I got a lot of friction at Apple, but resistance and friction and uncertainty because of external and internal dynamics. Yeah. You have, back to love. You have to absolutely go. I mean, those of us who fall or have fallen in love know that there's some high probability that it'll not work, especially when we're young. And we all know that the calamities can befall us from that point, or pain at least. Yeah. But you persist anyway. And I think with a big idea, and I want to just echo what Sarah said, everyone has that capacity. It's in our human nature to think big thoughts. And it can be in our nature to just persist. And that's what I did. Yeah. And did I know that as we were going sort of, more and more famous, we created a lot of infamy or some fame around the world. If we were to not succeed, it would be a long way down and a big bump at the end.
But you don't think about that.
You know it, and you have to suppress it.
Okay.
And the art of suppressing makes you, interestingly, what's the opposite of vulnerable? Invulnerable, or insulated, or detached. Now, detached can be a good word. I'm going to talk about that for a second. But you certainly back off from a sense of being grounded, because so many things in the world and so many people in the world are saying, ain't never going to happen. You're not going to get the money. You're not going to sell the tech. You're not going to get channels of distribution set up. The customers aren't going to like it, etc. Competition leads your life. So there's a lot of negativity that comes at you all the time.
Yeah.
Not useless stuff. This is stuff to be paid attention to as an entrepreneur. So, but that's what I did. And I knew that I was suppressing introspection, and that I'd have to pay for it later. And I was right.
Yeah. So the time has shot by, and we've got a few more minutes left. I'm going to just ask you both if you can sum up very briefly, and I'll give you a moment to think about this. Sort of what lessons can our audience, the innovators of today, learn from General Magic? And maybe if you can each give us one, that would be great. But what I want to say to the audience is, first of all, the movie will be streamed sort of straight after this, so please stay tuned. It is absolutely worth your time. Second of all, I've had half an hour with these guys and a bit of time before, and it's inspiring talking to both Marc and to Sarah. And you can learn more about the film, or even have a private screening and a panel for your company, for your teams. So just go to generalmagicthemovie.com, www.generalmagicthemovie.com to learn more. And just a reminder, a very boring admin point here, but the main Global Innovation Forum will be under a different link. It's giflondon.com/virtual. So that's the admin out the way. Guys, I'm going to return to you both. Maybe Sarah, you, and then Marc to bring us home. So what lesson can our innovators take from the story of General Magic?
Well, for me, I think it comes back to what Marc said about love. I would frame it slightly differently in terms of passion for me. But, I've been working for the last 10 years in the cancer space, and most recently in a company that's developing AI to detect breast cancer. And there's a power and a force and a conviction that comes when you work with something that really aligns with your values and something you care so deeply about. I'm so conscious that life is so short and we have so many problems to fix, but I also have enduring optimism in the human spirit, as Marc said, to solve problems and to create. So I think for me, it's that. If anyone is listening to this and feeling that they're not really doing something that really means something deeply to them, then I would question that. Because I think it's the most extraordinary privilege to work on something that you care really deeply about, and know that even if it's not you, and even if this iteration of what you're doing isn't successful, you're contributing to a bigger story. And that story is, in our case, earlier detection of cancer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And Marc, I know you've been involved in the sort of environment and green tech, but what sort of lesson would you want to share?
Well, the innovators that are here watching are self-described innovators. Otherwise, they would not be in this conference. So, what was it that got you to self-describe, to say to yourself, "I am an innovator," or at least I'm interested in being an innovator? Well, even if you say you're interested, you already are. So just give that up. You're innovators. So digging into sort of the authentic you, not the you that's showing off on Facebook with an artificial persona, or that owes a debt to someone else about something. The authentic you that, as Sarah said, is your passion. That's an indicator. Now, what I just said was cliche, because everyone says follow your passion and you'll be happy. Follow also your warlike, aggressive, self-reflective self.
Okay.
Because this is a hard road. It is not an easy road. Any entrepreneur that's successful or not financially that says, I just did it. No, this is a road of toughness and resilience in the face of terrible obstacles of one sort or another. 60% of which you generate for yourself. Most people, I think, are authors of their own problems, their own anxieties. And, and as I said, when you're a leader, you spend a third of your time raising money, or half your time actually raising money, half your time being a therapist, and the other half the time actually running the company or developing the product or the service. So it's that self-awareness part of who you are and what the team is. And by the way, you need a great team. If you have a lousy team, it ain't going to work. It's not going to work. So even if the team is one other person, a partner. And those would be my takeaways. Green tech, you mentioned, the environment, climate change. Well, as a great Trump supporter, I actually don't believe in climate change. I also don't believe in COVID. And so there's nothing to be said. But if you do happen to believe in climate change as an existential issue, that's the kind of thing that is big enough to engage in and grab your passion and pull it out of you, but also grab your courage and your aggression and your ability to actually work inside a team and do something. Small a aggression, not large, not capital A. And have ego, small letter E ego, not capital E ego. And have the drive and the force and the willingness to sustain tough shots to the head when you least expect them and least welcome, and persevere. If you're willing to do that, then there's some 1 in 10 chance you'll succeed. I shouldn't have said that. Then there's a chance you'll succeed.
Yeah.
And there's actually a strong chance if you've calibrated who you are and your own understanding of your own skills with the right market timing and the right product and the right service, it solves a real need for real people who are willing to pay for it.
Well, Marc and Sarah, I'm very sorry, but as is the theme of the month, we need to stop the count here. But the good news for all of those watching is we are going to spin straight into the movie. I think you mentioned, Marc, that you lived in a revolutionary time. I think we all are currently in a revolutionary time again. So to the audience, to all those out there, go and create your general magic, dream big, you know, show the resilience, passion that Sarah and Marc have talked about. And we look forward to inspiring you with more talks over the next few days. So that's it from us, but sit back and enjoy this wonderful documentary. Thank you, guys.